that some lady will arrive, in which case that's where they should be. So maybe if you want to move over ahead of time. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Janavallabha Girivardhari Jaya Gopi Janavallabha Girivardhari Girivardhari Yashodanandana Padjana Ranjana Yashodanandana Padjana Ranjana Jamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Hare Hare. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahamsa Padavajaka Ashtottara Sri Srimad His Divine Grace Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki Jai. ISKCON BBT Founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahamsa Padavajaka Ashtottara Sri Srimad His Divine Grace Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Ki Jai. Ananda Koti Vaishnava Ki Jai. Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai. Srimad Bhagavad Gita Ki Jai. Samaveda Bhaktivinoda Ki Jai. All glories to the sum of devotees. All glories to the sum of devotees. All glories to the sum of devotees. All glories to Shri Guru and Gauranga. Okay, we read that. Okay, text 19, page 274. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. On this 6th day of September, 2022 in San Diego, Holy Ekadashi Day, We are reading from Srimad Bhagavad Gita as it is, translation and commentary by His Divine Grace, HG Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. We are in chapter 6 entitled Dhyana-yoga. We are on text 19, page 274. Yata Dipo Nivatasto Nengate Sopama Smrita Yogino Yatachittasya Yunjato Yogamatmanaha Yatadipo Navatasto Nengate Sopamasmita Yogino Yatachittasya Yunjato Yogamatmanaha Yatadipo Navatasto Nengate Sopamasmita Yogino Yatachittasya Yunjato Yogamatmanaha Yatadipo Navatasto Nengate Sopamasmita Yogino Yatachittasya Yunjato Yogamatmanaha. Radhika Jivana. Yatadipo Navatasto Nengate Sopamasmita Yogino Yatachittasya Yunjato Yogamatmanaha. Yatadipo Navatasto Nopamasmita Yogino Yatachittasya Yunjato Yogamatmanaha. Want to try it, Frederick? Not yet. Okay. Haribol. I'll say this word by words myself. Yata as dipaha, a lamp, nivatastaha, in a place without wind. Na does not ingate, waver. Sa, this, upama, comparison. Smrita is considered yoginaha, of the yogi, yatachittasya, whose mind is controlled, yunjataha, constantly engaged, yogam, in meditation, atmanaha, on transcendence. As a lamp in a windless place does not waver, so the transcendentalist whose mind is controlled remains always steady in his meditation on the transcendent self. Purport: a truly Krishna-conscious person, always absorbed in transcendence, in constant undisturbed meditation on his worshipable Lord, is as steady as a lamp in a windless place. Okay, we'll read the next few verses, and then we'll say something. Okay, we'll just go through and then you can repeat. Yatro panamate chittam nirudham yoga sevaya yatra chaivatmanatmanam pashyan atmani tushyati sukhamatyantikam yattad buddhigrayam atindriyam Veti yatra nachaivayam Stitas chalati tattvataha Yang labdva chapadang labham Manyate nadikam tataha Yasmin stito na dukkena Guruna pinadvichalyate Tam vidya dukkha sangyoga Viyogam yoga sangitam. In the stage of perfection called trance or samadhi, one's mind is completely restrained from material mental activities by practice of yoga. This perfection is characterized by one's ability to see the self by the pure mind and to relish and rejoice in the self. In that joyous state, one is situated in boundless transcendental happiness, realized through transcendental senses. Established thus, one never departs from the truth, and upon gaining this, he thinks there is no greater gain. Being situated in such a position, one is never shaken, even in the midst of greatest difficulty. This indeed is actual freedom from all miseries arising from material contact. Speaking of material contact, it's gotten kind of cold. I'm going to turn up the thermostat. Sorry about that. Very deceptive. I put it up to 75 degrees, but it's still at 75 degrees. It's 75 degrees up there where it senses reheat rising. Well, shows I haven't transcended the dualities of heat and cold, pleasure and pain. Hare Krishna. Okay, purport. By practice of yoga, one becomes gradually detached from material concepts. This is the primary characteristic of the yoga principle. And after this, one becomes situated in trance or samadhi, which means that the yogi realizes the supersoul through transcendental mind and intelligence, without any of the misgivings of identifying the self with the superself. Yoga practice is more or less based on the principles of the Patanjali system. Some unauthorized commentators try to identify the individual soul with the supersoul, and the monists think this to be liberation. But they do not understand the real purpose of the Patanjali system of yoga. There is an acceptance of transcendental pleasure in the Patanjali system, but the monists do not accept this transcendental pleasure out of fear of jeopardizing the theory of oneness. The duality of knowledge and knower is not accepted by the non-dualist. But in this verse, transcendental pleasure, realized through transcendental senses, is accepted. And this is corroborated by Patanjali Muni, the famous exponent of the yoga system. The great sage declares in his Yoga Sutras 434, excuse me, Purushartha shunyanam gunanam pratipasavaha kaivalyam svarūpa patishta va chitti shaktir iti. This chitti shakti, or internal potency, is transcendental. Purushartha means material religiosity, economic development, sense gratification, and, at the end, the attempt to become one with the Supreme. This oneness with the Supreme is called kaivalyam by the monist. But according to Patanjali, this kaivalyam is an internal or transcendental potency by which the living entity becomes aware of its constitutional position. In the words of Lord Chaitanya, this state of affairs is called Cheto Darpana Marjanam, or clearance of the impure mirror of the mind. This clearance is actually liberation, or bhavamahadavagni nirvapanam. The theory of nirvāṇa, also preliminary, corresponds with this principle. In the Bhagavatam 2.10.6, this is called svarūpeṇa vyavasthitiḥ. The Bhagavad Gita also confirms this situation in this verse. After nirvāṇa, or material cessation, there is the manifestation of spiritual activities or devotional service to the Lord, known as Krishna consciousness. In the words of the Bhagavatam, svarūpeṇa vyavasthitiḥ, this is the real life of the living entity. Māyā, or illusion, is the condition of spiritual life contaminated by material infection. Liberation from this material infection does not mean destruction of the original eternal position of the living entity. Patanjali also accepts this by his words, Kaivalyam svarūpa patishta va chitti shaktir iti. This chitti shakti, or transcendental pleasure, is real life. This is confirmed in the Vedanta Sutra 1.1.12 as anandamayo bhyasat. This natural transcendental pleasure is the ultimate goal of yoga and is easily achieved by execution of devotional service, or bhakti yoga. Bhakti yoga will be vividly described in the 7th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. In the yoga system, as described in this chapter, There are two kinds of samadhi, called sampragata samadhi and asampragata samadhi. When one becomes situated in the transcendental position by various philosophical researches, he is said to have achieved sampragata samadhi. In asampragata samadhi, there is no longer any connection with mundane pleasure, for one is then transcendental to all sorts of happiness derived from the senses. When the yogi is once situated in that transcendental position, he is never shaken from it. Unless the yogi is able to reach this position, he is unsuccessful. Today's so-called yoga practice, which involves various sense pleasures, is contradictory. A yogi indulging in sex and intoxication is a mockery. Even those yogis who are attracted by the siddhis, or perfections, in the process of yoga, are not perfectly situated. If yogis are attracted by the byproducts of yoga, then they cannot attain the stage of perfection, as is stated in this verse. Persons, therefore, indulging in the make-show practice of gymnastic feats, or siddhis, should know that the aim of yoga is lost in that way. The best practice of yoga in this age is Krishna consciousness, which is not baffling. A Krishna conscious person is so happy in his occupation that he does not aspire after any other happiness. There are many impediments, especially in this age of hypocrisy, to practicing Hatha Yoga, Dhyana-yoga, and Jnana-yoga. But there is no such problem in executing Karma Yoga or Bhakti Yoga. As long as the material body exists, one has to meet the demands of the body, namely eating, sleeping, defending, and mating. But a person who is in pure Bhakti Yoga or in Krishna consciousness does not arouse the senses while meeting the demands of the body. Rather, he accepts the bare necessities of life, making the best use of a bad bargain, and enjoys transcendental happiness in Krishna consciousness. He is callous toward incidental occurrences, such as accidents, disease, scarcity, and even the death of a most dear relative. But he is always alert to execute his duties in Krishna consciousness, or Bhakti Yoga. Accidents never deviate him from his duty. As stated in the Bhagavad Gita 2.14, Agamapahino anityas tam tatikshasva bharata. He endures all such incidental occurrences because he knows that they come and go and do not affect his duties. In this way, he achieves the highest perfection in yoga practice. Om jnana-timirandasya jnanandana shalakaya chakshu unmilatam mena tasmai shri gurave namaha. I was born in the darkest of ignorance, but my spiritual master Srila Prabhupada opened my eyes with the torchlight of knowledge. I offer my humble obeisance unto him and all members of Sri Parampara. So, back to text 19. This is a famous analogy that Krishna gives, the unwavering flame as related to the consciousness of the mature yogi in transcendence or in samadhi, as described in the next few verses. And we can compare that to the character of the mind, that not in yoga. It's constantly flickering. Arjuna will mention it later in this chapter, Chanchalam hi mana Kṛṣṇa pramati balavadraham jadham, that the mind is very flickering, it's very fickle, and it's very powerful and obstinate. And to control it, Arjuna says, by this means, for him, is like trying to control the wind. In other words, impossible. But it is possible by the processes that have been outlined here. But is it really practical for those of this age? That's the question. And the answer will be no. Even in this Bhagavad Gita at the end of this chapter, when Krishna describes Bhakti Yoga as the best kind of yoga, those who are thinking of him. And then, as Prabhupada points out, in the 7th chapter, he begins describing a practical way in which we can begin to see Krishna everywhere and develop our Krishna consciousness. But these 3.5 verses, 20 to 23, are very interesting because they really do correspond to the state of the highest levels of bhakti. And I'll just give you a little, how should I put it, an editing event that takes place, because I had this experience with this book for many years. And you probably understand, you know this, you're reading Prabhupada's books a little bit, that is a convention in the use of the word self. There's the individual self with a small s, and the super self or super soul with a large s. Well, there's nothing in this verse immediately that you first see that says that in the first sentence here that it should be the capital self. The perfection is characterized by one's ability to see the self by the pure mind and to relish and rejoice in the self. And indeed, in the first Bhagavad Gita, and probably the first Bhagavad Gita is the unabridged Bhagavad Gita published in 1968, and in the second version that became so famous, Macmillan Gita, unabridged, printed in 72, it was a small s self. And so that remained actually in 83 when the revision was made. But then when I looked at it and I read the first paragraph where Prabhupada says, this is the primary characteristic of the yoga principle, and after this one becomes situated in trance or samadhi, which means that the yogi realizes the super soul through transcendental mind and intelligence without any of the misgivings of identifying the small s self with the super self. You see that? So that to me, that's a perfect was a perfect call from Prabhupada in this way to capitalize that s in the translation. Otherwise, there's every chance of confusing or misgivings of identifying the self with the small s self with the super self, because it's small s self. So this is really an important point, because this means the self, that's your rejoicing in Krishna, in your Krishna consciousness. It's not just meditating on yourself, in the soul, or even the super soul. And those yogis who meditate on the super soul, and they don't achieve the same kind of varied relationships with Krishna that we find in real bhakti, in ultimate bhakti. As Prabhupada emphasizes in this purport, the definition of mukti given in the Bhagavatam is not just liberation. Mukti means liberation, but that's kind of a negative thing. I'm free, no more birth, old age, disease, and death. Now I'm merged into Brahman. I'm free. But that's not real mukti according to Bhagavatam. Muktir hitva anyata rupam svarūpeṇa vyavasthitiḥ. In the second canto, in the 10th chapter, I believe it is, there's kind of a table of contents there of the subject matters to be dealt with in the Bhagavatam, the whole Bhagavatam, and there's 10 of them. And this mukti is defined there. This is what each one is. So mukti, this is the most famous of the definitions. Mukti, real mukti, hitva anyata rupam. What does that mean? They're giving up on other forms. In other words, we've been rotating with birth, old age, disease, and death in this material world for who knows how long, since time immemorial, Prabhupada said. You can't really put a date on it when we came here. And as soon as you come here to live in the material world, that means you need a material body. So Prabhupada said you start out with Brahma, but not every Brahma goes back to Godhead. And you go down, you can become eventually two. The worm and stool. Prabhupada would give that as low as you can go. But we're now in the human form. The human form is, of all the forms, it's the most facilitating for actually breaking out of the round of birth and death and going back to God. So, anyata rupam, other forms. You're free, you're liberated from all these other forms, including all the forms we've had in this very lifetime. As Krishna points out at the beginning of the Bhagavad Gita, even in this one life, we keep changing bodies. It's subtle and slow, but after a while, it's obvious, right? It's obvious. So, and then you get a whole new body, and you go on and on and on. So these are all the other terms. This is mukti hitva. You're giving up all these other bodies, no more of those bodies, and you're situated in your svarūp. Svarūp means your original eternal form that's just suited for your particular details of your rasa with Krishna. Whether it may be a gopi, a cowherd boy, it may be a cow, it may be the flute, it may be the grass. Everything in Goloka Vrindavan is completely conscious. They're all fully conscious. And those trees are very happy being trees. And it's beautifully described, the gopis, when they're thinking of Krishna, when he goes to the forest, they don't forget him. They, of course, are absorbed in thought of him. And there's four or five different songs called Gopi Gits in the Bhagavatam, in the 10th canto. And one of them is called the Yugal Git. A Yugal Git, it's called Yugal means paired because they a pair of verses, and I think also a pair of gopis get together and sing. That's called the Yugal Git. So one of the verses, the gopis are thinking, they're doing they're churning butter and doing whatever else they're supposed to do, but they're singing of Krishna. They're completely absorbed in him in the forest. So one of the things they say is that anucharai samanavarnata virya adipurusha hibachala bhuti vanacharokadita tadantir venanavayati gasi yadahi. A very nice beat. Anucharai, those are his followers. Samanavarnatavirya, they're beautiful. They're singing about his glories as they enter into the forest. There's the cowherd boys, hundreds and thousands of them accompanying all the cows. They're playing. Their job is to herd the cows, but all they do all day is play as they herd. Isn't that a great job? Adi Purusha Ivachala Bhuti. It is as if the gopis don't know it's Krishna. This is as if Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead surrounded by his multi-energies. Adi Purusha Ivachala Bhuti. Vanacharo, within the forest, they're moving in the forest. Giri Tateshu, sometimes on the side of the hills, sometimes on the side of Govardhana. Chadanti Venanavayati. Then when he calls out, he plays that flute. Gasi Yadahi. In order to call the cows, he'll play the flute, and with that flute he can also call their names, believe it or not. So what happens? Vanalatastadava atmani vishnam vyanjayanti hiva pushpa paladhya panata bhada patapamadadara prema rishchatanabo babashusma. So all the trees and the creepers there, they're fully conscious, and they realize, oh, Krishna's coming our way. They immediately blossom with fruits and flowers. Just like we've all seen, the time-lapse photography, boom, suddenly they're full of fruit. And not only that, but the sweet sap is also flowing down, and that's like tears. And it's the extra weight, suddenly they bow down from the extra weight of the fruits and flowers. This is what the vision the gopis are having at a distance. They manifest those fruits and flowers just like when a yogi becomes realized. He becomes so enlivened in his body. Oh, now I'm seeing God within the heart. That's the comparison. So this is the variety, the ever exuberant, ever fresh. It's not like they do the same thing every day. Yes, Krishna goes out and herds the cows, but every day the games are a little different, the jokes are a little different, the adventures are different. And when he's on the earth, a little different demon comes and he kills, and there's all those adventures, This never repeats. It's all newer and newer. So how does that compare? Now, here you have, this is obviously a wonderful description. In that joyous state, one is situated in boundless transcendental happiness. Now that boundless transcendental happiness can only come in Krishna consciousness. It can't come just from realizing the super soul. That you get boundless peace, you get happiness, you get satisfaction, But the ultimate role of the living entity is to re-enter and to take part in Krishna's pastimes. Not just to be meditating, constantly and being conscious of Krishna. There is a rasa like that, Shanta Ras. But Shanta Ras is just on the cusp of actual bhakti. Real bhakti begins at Dasya Ras, understanding oneself to be a servant of Krishna. Now, each of the previous rasas is included in the next one. So what's the quality of Shanta Ras? Shanta Ras means peaceful. It means completely detached from sense gratification, or even the desire for sense gratification. Because one is completely satisfied in being Krishna conscious, thinking of Krishna. And you have that even in Goloka Vrindavan. You have the earth. The earth just, is waiting to be stepped on by Krishna, and is happy, is being Krishna conscious. But it doesn't take an active role in service, so it's mentioned like that. So, but then you have actual servants. You have his friends who are in the mood of service. They're a little younger than him, and then you have his friends of the same age, And then you have a little older who are more protective of Krishna. Balaram takes that role because he's a little older than Krishna. You know, so there's like a spectrum like that. But all of it is so exuberant, you know, and varied. And so then you have the real, you know, parental ras, Vatsalya ras, Madhya Yashoda and Nanda Maharaj, they epitomize that, you know. But then you have so many other elders, you know, who also take that same role and have that protective sense of Krishna. And he presents himself that way, that he needs protection, especially when he's, you know, 3 years old, 2 years old. You know, he might get pricked by some thorn or something, or they're so dangerous in the forest. You know, they're always in the anxiety of maternal love, and that's another kind of ecstasy. You know, we know Krishna is not going to get hurt, but they don't know that. They just see him as this beautiful, you know, fragile boy that they love unlimitedly. And then, of course, you have the gopis. And the gopis, they have all the things. They're the servants of Krishna. That, you know, that famously, if Krishna has a headache, you know, this famous thing, they had a headache, and he said, the only remedy is the dust of the feet of my devotees. If I get that dust on my head, I'll be solved. You know, he was testing. And the regular devotees said, oh, I would never put the dust of my feet on Krishna's head. I go to hell, you know, I would never do it. And finally the gopis said, oh, I don't care. If Krishna will relieve his headache, take it, you see. In other words, they're completely sold out. They regard the tip of Krishna's toe millions of times more valuable than their own lives, you know. So they're the best servants, the best friends, the best maintainers, and of course the lovers, which is unique among them. So this is the great variety of mature bhakti, and it's all there within us. Every one of us has that potency. Nitya siddha Krishna prema sadhya kapunoi shavanadi shuddha chitte karayudoi. This is a part of the teaching of Lord Chaitanya and Sanatana Goswami. And he says very important. He says a very important verse. The eternal perfection of prema, or pure love for Krishna, is there in every soul. It does not have to be brought from outside. It's not something, you know, artificial. And how does one awaken it or discover it? Shravanadi shuddha chitte, by purifying the consciousness, beginning with hearing, chanting, remembering, serving, the 9 processes of devotional service. The most prominent of which is hearing. So Shavanai Shuddha Chitte, the heart becomes purified and it naturally awakens. It's already there, so it becomes manifest. It's not something artificial. It's our natural. So this is Swarup. Swarup implies a form, but it's the form and the original function that we all have in relation to Krishna. That's real mukti. There's no question of coming back here after that, you see. So that's and Prabhupada emphasizes here, he focuses on Patanjali. This is probably based on the Baladev Vijayabhushan's commentary. And there's this Purushartha Shunyanam Gunanam Patipasava Kaivalyam Sarupa Patishta Va Chitti Shakti Riti. That the Chitti Shakti is Prabhupada says, is the pleasure energy, the internal pleasure energy, Ladani Shakti. Which means that there's the ultimate realization of yoga, perfection of yoga is personal, is bhakti yogi. And Prabhupada, he equates that Chitti Shakti with the Cheto Darpana Marjanam. This is Lord Chaitanya's famous first words of his Shikshastika. And it's the same idea, cleansing the mirror of the heart. It's all a question of purification. In other words, that makes perfect sense. If we are intrinsically Krishna servants, then what's preventing us from understanding it? The impurities that we've accumulated in our consciousness over eons being here. So how to get purified? The most powerful and efficient way, especially in this age, is chanting the holy name. Cheto Darpana Marjanam. And as soon as that cleansing, you know, is not even fully done, Bhava Mahadavagni Nirvāṇam. The fire, the blazing fire of material life, birth and death, is extinguished. Because that fire is fed, or we're maintained in this cycle of birth and death by the impurities in the heart, which keep us coming back and back and back to try to fulfill unfulfilled desires. So the whole thing is, you can see, the purification of desire. Example, prasadam. You know, everybody has to eat, right, to live. So Krishna consciousness says, okay, here's how you can eat and be spiritual at the same time. And that is that you offer your food, you cook food that's pleasing to Krishna, you know, and that from the certain ingredients, what is it? How's that word? Pushpam palam toyam. What's the first verse? Patram. Thank you. Patram pushpam palam toyam. From leaves, you know, from the flowers, which you can regard as the wheat berries and everything, you know. In other words, what vegetarian food and milk, of course, and like that. So you prepare it from that with love and devotion. You offer love and devotion. You honor it with love and devotion, and it becomes a sacrament. It doesn't bind you to this world. Rather, it binds you to Krishna. It gets you closer to Krishna. You've expressed your love by offering it to him. He's expressed his love by giving it back to you, you know. And it's been transformed. Prabhupada says it's been transformed, and it's spiritualizing. So that's you know, the cynosure of things that we have to do in order to live that can be spiritualized. But Prabhupada, he showed by, you know, from the very first days of 26th Avenue, how he every act that they performed was something in service, and some of it was for sustaining. You know, Satsup Maharaj, Bhakta Steve, you know, and no one was initiated first. He had a job. Several of them had jobs. Okay, keep the job, and then give you know, you can live here, you know, or live simply, you know, you place whatever you, and whatever extra you have, you give to the temple, and it supports it. And this is the way things were going on. Before there was any hint of book distribution, there were no books printed, you know. Prabhupada had his ones that he'd printed, but those were limited. So the point is that it's possible to live in that mood of constantly serving the things that you need to survive. You do as service. Even sleep can be service. Oh, I've got it. You know, I have to maintain the body, therefore sleep. And in this way, your whole life becomes spiritualized. So that's and it's practical. You know, the Patanjali system is practically impossible for modern people to perform. You can have, you know, yoga studios and you practice a little meditation. I did that, you know. And it's very, you know, it's calming, it's nice, you know, but you're not getting out of birth and death by that, you know. It's not even mentioned, you know. It's all about getting a healthy body and calming your mind, you know, which is fine, but that's not going to help you ultimately. But believe it or not, parts of it, you know, when it's used for Krishna consciousness in the Bhakti Vilas, I understand, although I haven't read it, but that there's a little instruction in pranayama, where your household, you know, to calm the mind before you chant japa, you know, there's no harm in that. There's a little anecdote where Prabhupada was walking with his, you know, as he did every morning with some disciples, and they were going through a little park, I think it was in Bombay somewhere, and there was a young man standing on his head. And one of, you know, the devotees who were walking with us, oh, Prabhupada, we don't do that anymore. He said, oh, you should try it. It's actually pretty good for you. I do it. I don't stand on my head. I have a device where the head is above the ground, but it's all on the shoulders. But the verse, it's good for the, you know, for the brain. You know, got to keep the old brain going. So anyway, but it's you know, I don't think I'm going to get perfection by that. That's a facility to help me stay healthy to do my service. So it's all a question of your motive and you know, doing it under authority. So let's see, there's a lot in this. Go ahead. No, they didn't bring the mics out.
Okay, that's fine. So
I'll repeat it.
You mentioned one phrase, so many forms.
Yes, no, not so many sarups. We have one sarup, but we have all of these other forms. Anyata rup. Anyata rup.
You also mentioned we were Brahma at one point.
This is Prabhupada revealed. You know, this came in the ninth canto. You know, he finished with the 10th canto, the 13 chapters. So this came out in the end of 76 or 77, I guess. I forget when that last volume of. There were 3 volumes of 9th canto at that time. But in a purport, I can find it for you. Prabhupada says directly that when you fall down from the spiritual world, the first birth you take is Brahma. And immediately you say, boy, that's kind of inconceivable. Because and then most Brahmas, they don't go back. The Brahma we have in this universe, who is the head of our Sampradaya, who's the spiritual master of Narada Muni, he's going back. And those who are mature in Krishna consciousness on Brahmaloka, they'll go back with him. But not everybody in Brahmaloka goes back. So there were countless universes, and so many of those Brahmas, they continue on their way down, and it's inconceivable. The time scale to fill up just this one planet with living entities, there's trillions of them, just in this patio. They all were Brahmas at one time.
Because they don't digest that Krishna is the supreme, that's why they keep.
They maintain. They become attached to the creation that they do. You can imagine, having so much responsibility and so much honor and living so long. You can easily get a little puffed up, but they're not pure, and so they become down. So that's what happens, and over limitless time, it fills up the universes. That's the way Prabhupada explained it. Sure. Okay. Do you know where the mics are, in case we need? Okay. We have a little time left. All right. Let's go on.
Hi, Krishna. May I ask
Oh
a
yes,
question,
please. Yes. I'm sorry, I forgot.
That's okay. So in the purport, it says that at the last paragraph, it says that, I guess, with someone in samadhi is callous toward incidental occurrences such as accidents, disease, scarcity, and even the death of a most dear relative. But I seem to remember that, like, when Vaishnavas lose another Vaishnav, like, I guess isn't the same as relative, but if you have like a friend or someone who's a Vaishnav, that you're naturally going to be sad because you're separated from them, like when great devotees leave their bodies. So
Yeah.
I'm wondering if this is like a most dear relative who's not a devotee, you're kind of callous to that. But like if it was the death of a devotee, then you would be. I mean, obviously that they were getting another body or going back to Godhead, but you'd still be upset.
Yeah. That's a good point, and that comes up at the beginning of the Bhagavad Gita, believe it or not. That this whole point, and the famous verse, Krishna said, "Dehi nosmin yata dehi komaram yobanam jada." He's speaking to Arjuna and trying to impress on him the importance, overall importance of the soul as opposed to the body, so that he's not freaked out by the death, imminent death, by his own hand in many ways, to these dear devotees like dear souls like Bhishma Dev and so forth. And so Krishna makes that point. I mean, this is just science. Everybody's going through, and eventually they'll die and go on to another body. So nobody really dies. That's the point. He emphasizes that in the Jayate Mete Bhagavatam. But then, what does he say? Matra sparshasta konteya, shitoshna sukadukata. He says that the dualities, such as heat and cold, pleasure and pain, they come and they go. One has to learn to tolerate them without being disturbed. And so what he's saying there is that I understand that it's going to be very painful. It's understood. But you have to maintain your equilibrium in spite of feeling those things. Especially when you mentioned, the death of a devotee. Certainly the feeling is there. And this word callous, maybe Prabhupada was using it in a more broad way, meaning that one maintains his equilibrium even when these things happen. It's not that we don't lament the loss of a dear devotee. We have our memorials, and we have our ceremonies where you cast the dust into the Ganges or whatever. There's a lot of that, but then you move on, and especially you know that the person has moved on to a better situation, either gone back to Godhead or they're going to be devotees in the next life. So it's a different understanding, but the whole idea is that you don't let it disturb you so much and for so long that you lose your yoga connection. In other words, you use your ability to chant Hare Krishna, and you let that's the idea that Prabhupada is giving here. Accidents, disease. I had an accident. I had a serious sprain on my in my foot, and it was disturbing. because I could hardly walk, what to speak of dancing Artik, you know. And for a while I wasn't coming to the program, I couldn't even walk over here, you know. So I was, it was disturbing, but I saw it in a context. It's key verse of one of Brahma's prayers in the 14th chapter. And he's saying that, okay, this is disturbing, but I see this as something that's come from Krishna. That it could have been much worse, and it could have been much worse. I could have easily broken this ankle, but I didn't. And I was able to nurse it back, you know. And so that was, you know, a little accident. But I mean, you know, there were big accidents. There were big accidents. We've had devotees die in plane crashes. And, you know, we don't know, of course, exactly what was going on because everyone died on the plane. But Nirvāṇa Maharaj tells the story about himself. Of course, his plane didn't crash, but it was threatening to crash. He was on his way to India, going by the western route over the Pacific, and he knew from experience that at a certain point near Japan, there's often a lot of turbulence. So he had already been through that. So he described it as quite humorous. He was sitting next to, you don't know who you're going to sit next to on these planes. So it was one lady who was very kind of standoffish, you know, and she was old, had all this makeup and clothes and music. So she didn't want to talk to him, and he didn't really want to talk to her so much. So he was reading, you know, and chanting and reading, you know. And suddenly there was so much turbulence. You know, sometimes the plane will sink down so far that if people don't have their seatbelts on, they'll hit the ceiling. They even get killed by that sometimes. So they say, keep your seatbelt on even when you're seated. So Maharaj, you know, what did he do? He's chanting Hare Krishna. He has the beads. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Hare Hare, you know. He was ready. And she was just freaking out, you know. She was like screaming, you know. So after it was all over, calmed down. She said, "Well, what were you doing? You know, what?" And she was really curious to find out how he was able to get through it without so many difficulties. So, and there's other stories like that. Devotees of, you know, but there's also those tragic devotees where devotees have died on the plane. So the point is that, well, you know, when the danger comes, you chant from the bottom of your heart. That's what the whole idea is. Beginning of the second canto, you know, after Shukadeva Goswami is telling Parikar, because his question was the key question: what do you do? What should I think of? What should I hear as death approaches? He had 7 days notice. You know, we don't know if we have 7 days. We may have 70 years. So, but the question is, what should one's consciousness be at that time? You know. So Shukadeva goes through and he says, very, very nice question. The answer to that question is good for the one who gives the answer, one who hears the answer, and one who listens to it. You know. But on the other hand, you know, people in this world have millions of subject matters for hearing, other than these essential questions. You know. And then he gives an outline, you know, the very compact outline of material life. He says, what do they do? How do you spend your day? Nidriya, riyate naktam, vivayena chabhavayak, divachartahe rajan, kutumba balanenava. At nighttime, they either sleep or indulge in sex, you know. And during the daytime, they work hard for money. And then I swear, Prabhupada said this in one explaining this verse. And on the weekend, they shop. They're doing shopping in order to support the family. Kutumba badanena. Kutumba is the children and everything, you know. So that's their life. And then, of course, they know, you know, there's so many dangers, so they have soldiers to defend them. But unfortunately, they're fallible soldiers. Deha patte karatradi shatma saini vishatpapi te shampamatone pashanabina pashiti. Kind of working against time here. So he says, what are the fallibles? Well, the body. First of all, keep the body healthy, you know, body. And then the wife, and then the children. You know, you can make your own list, insurance policy, health insurance, and all that. But kalatradi atma sainyeshu, these are your soldiers to protect yourself. But unfortunately, they're asatsu. They're fallible soldiers. They really can't protect you. The body eventually gives out. These others, you know. So, and they said, Tesham pamato, because they're mad, they really don't see the reality. Nidanam pashan, although they've seen that such soldiers have died in history, you can't rely on them. They don't see. seeing but not seeing. Pashyanapi na pashyati. Therefore, he says, there's no point in living this kind of life. Etavan Sankhya Yoga Agyam Swadama Parinishtaya. No, I'm sorry, there's one verse. Tasmad Bharata Sarvatma Bhagavana Ishvaro Hari Shrotavya Kirtitavyascha Smartavya Chechitavayam. If you want fearlessness at the time of death, then here's the principles. O Bharata, a great descendant of King Bharata. Sarva, he gives three definitions of God: the Super Soul, Sarvama, Bhagavan, Supreme Personality, Ishvara, Hari, four, the Supreme Controller, and Hari. What should we do? Hear about, Shrotavya, chant about, Smartavya, and remember always. Smartavya, if you want unhappy. Because after all, Etavan Sankhya Yogyabhyam Swadama Parinishtaya Janmalabhak Parakpungsam Ante Narayana Smriti. That last line has become known. You know, that sums up the whole thing. The whole perfection of your life is to remember Narayan, Krishna, at the time of death. So he says, whether you're doing Sankhya or Yoga or you're just doing your work at home, the perfection will be if you can remember Narayan or Krishna at the time of life. So how can you assure that? By practicing Bhakti Yoga between now and when you leave the body. So that's the beginning of the second canto. The whole thing starts again, actually. The Shukadeva actually starts speaking in the second canto at the beginning. So like 6 verses, you got a summary of the whole Bhagavatam. If you can understand that point, you're okay. And I made a recording of those with all the purports that Prabhupada has there, just on that. What to do at death. I went to India one time and someone told me, oh, we heard your tape. My father was dying and we put it on. Well, I'm just reading Prabhupada's books. Treasures, great treasures. Thank you for listening. It's time to get ready for the kirtan. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Hari Hari Bol.